I'd like to introduce our guest on today's show, Laura Janusik, who is an MBA, CLP, and the CEO of Listening to Change. A recent survey indicated that 70% of people think they're above average listeners and believe those around them are below average. If you know anything about math, you know that can't be true. So how can you know if you're really a good listener? Laura Janusik, aka hashtag Dr. J Listen, can help you find out. Laura is leveraging her past experience, which includes 15 years of corporate experience and over 20 years as a professor and researcher of listening, to help coaches, salespeople, and business leaders develop better relationships through the power of listening. Laura is known throughout the world as a leading expert in teaching and training listening. Her PhD in communications and her MBA assist her in using research-based information to help people become better listeners and gain the results they desire, whether that be better relationships, increased sales, or more trust, just to name a few. Her research and ideas have been published nationally and internationally, having been cited in publications including Forbes, Harvard Business Review, The Wall Street Journal, NPR, and US News and World Report. Laura, I'm really excited to have you on the show today. Thanks for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Michael. I'm very excited too.
I know the salespeople who regularly watch this channel are going to get great benefit from this conversation because, as I've discovered over the years, as a salesperson myself, we can all improve our listening skills.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to just jump in and ask you the first question.
Sure.
Listening is important in all conversations, of course, but why is it especially crucial in sales conversations?
That's a great question. And I would say that there are two reasons for this. First of all, as all of the people listening well know, people buy based on emotions, not on logic. We justify with logic, but we really get that gut feeling, and we make a lot of purchases based on emotions. And so particularly for salespeople, it's really important to listen for those emotions and to be able to get them out in the conversation or intuit them really, really well in order to be successful in sales. And from a larger perspective, the second perspective is the whole goal of communication is to create shared meaning. So think about that one a second. Your goal is to create shared meaning so that the picture in your mind is as close as the picture in the client's or the prospect's mind that you have. And if you don't have that shared meaning, then you're talking a different language and a sale is probably not going to occur, or an extended relationship isn't going to occur.
So explain that concept just a little bit more for us, Laura, about shared meaning, so that our sales viewers can understand that and make sure that they don't miss this important point.
Yeah, and this is really critical. So thank you for that invitation. So when I talk about communication, I'm talking about the combination of speaking and listening. And most of us get a lot of instruction in speaking, how to say things, how to persuade people, how to influence people. But only 2% of the population ever gets any training in listening, how to make personal meaning, because that's what listening does in terms of comprehension. We make personal meaning based on the stimuli that we're taking in. So we're looking at our prospect, we're looking at our client, and we're listening to the words that they're using. And we're also looking at the nonverbals. And so we're creating a whole story in our head about how ready they are to buy, or if our product really is going to solve the problems that they have. But if that story stays in our head and we don't check it out with them, then we haven't created shared meaning. And that's why shared meaning is just so critical in sales, because it builds that relationship.
So then where do salespeople often make mistakes when it comes to listening?
Well, I would say, I'll give you two mistakes, because I know you're the expert here, Michael, and you could probably give 20 mistakes in the same amount of time that I would cover too. But I say, first of all, a lot of times salespeople come from the analytical mindset of look at all of the bells and whistles of this cool thing that I have to sell you. And so they are totally into telling because they hope to get the prospect as excited about this thing and all of its bells and whistles as they are. And that seldom works when we do the telling approach. We really have to start with the listening approach. What kinds of bells and whistles does this prospect need or want? What are the reasons for these bells and whistles? So we really need to understand that first. So I'd say the first mistake that salespeople make is by trying to sell the service or the product or the bells and whistles before they really understand what the other wants. The second is oftentimes I find that salespeople, and this is not really only salespeople, people in general, in many respects, they listen to the first thing that comes out of the other's mouth and they take that as the reality of the situation. But for most people, we don't say the first thing that is most important to us. We hold that back. So if salespeople act upon the first thing that's out of the prospect's mouth, they're going to be going down incorrect roads or pathways and probably not make that sale.
Now, I've heard of multiple levels of listening, such as listening to respond, listening to understand, etc. Is there a particular level of listening that salespeople should be aware of and employ most often?
Yeah. One of the greatest pieces of advice or knowledge that I got from Graham Bodu, who I consider to be one of the world's best listening researchers currently alive, is he said that models are really only important in terms of the context. So you have to think about the context that you're in. Sales is a context that includes a lot of different areas. Ultimately, the quality of the listening determines the quality of the relationship. And I think we could both agree that sales is a relationship. And you don't want just a relationship, I'm going to sell you something today and then never see you again. You want a relationship where you get excited about what I can sell you and you come back to me time and time again. So when we look at sales as a relationship, if that's the way that you want to look at the model, then I think there are three areas of listening that become really, really important. First, listening for the content. And that is trickier than you think it is because recent research has supported this idea that we have 4 different listening filters or listening dominances. And if people are speaking from a different dominance than that person is listening, then you're going to have miscommunication and you're not going to align your communication. So listening for what is said. I think for salespeople in particular, you have to listen to what is unsaid because this person is getting a lot of people trying to sell them things. So they're not going to tell you everything that they need. You really have to develop that relationship and figure out what they need, what's unsaid, and ask questions about what's unsaid. And then finally, the emotions, because that goes back to this idea. Well, 2 ideas. Number one, people buy based on emotions and justify based on logic, but also this idea that we would rather do business with people we like, and we like listeners.
This is causing me to just reflect for a moment. I've often heard this phrase, people do business with people they know, like, and trust. And one way to have someone like you more is to be a better listener.
Not only like you more, Michael, but also trust you more.
Mm-hmm.
Listening has been tied to trust, how we listen. And I think that people oftentimes have this misperception that listening means that you're just sitting here with no facial expression and taking in words. But listening as a part of communication includes what I call verbal listening skills. So it actually includes what you're reflecting back to the prospect or the client as well.
And I know that our viewers are already gaining ideas on things that they can do to improve their listening skills based on the answers that you've shared to the questions, Laura, but let's get specific here. what are a few quick ways salespeople can improve their listening skills?
I love that. And let me give you three. So I'm going to break my two, but I'm going to give you three. I think first of all is the silence. Silence is really important, particularly in the American culture. And the reason for that is research suggests that we generally respond within a half a second when the other person quits talking. But 3 seconds is where people start getting a little bit uncomfortable. And that oftentimes makes the other person break the silence. So as a salesperson, I would recommend really practicing the pause. Bite your tongue for 3 seconds after the client or the prospect has finished speaking, because chances are they're going to break the silence and continue speaking and get you some of that information that you really need to know. So I think practicing the pause is a really important one. I also think that recognizing that only 2% of the population ever gets any listening training at all is really important. And so making sure that you're getting listening training that's based on the research as opposed to an individual's perception of what listening is or what listening should be. And that listening education, I would say, really needs to take place with a coach. So you have some one-on-one time to actually practice the skills. And the reason for this is you and I both know, everybody knows when they hear this, that behavior, and listening as a behavior, never changes based totally on knowledge. So I can read all of the books I want about how to become a better listener, but if I don't actually practice it, I'm not going to change my behavior in it. So you can't just know something, you have to know and do something. And then the last thing I would say is it's really important to understand some of the listening research that does exist. We've been studying listening for well over 50 years. And I think I had said the analytical mindset before. I think one of the most exciting pieces of research that's been out in the last couple of years that really can help salespeople is this idea that individuals have different listening filters, meaning that's what we listen to and that's what we listen for. So we can learn to identify, obviously, our own listening filters, but our prospects' listening filters. And the reason that's so powerful is because once we can identify their listening filters, we can start speaking into their listening filters. So we're more quickly aligning our communication and really speaking their language. So I would say the three things really are staying silent for 3 seconds, getting a coach and getting some training, being in a program where there's actually practice that's involved in it, and understanding the research that supports it.
Well, that sounds like a lot of effort, but good effort, right? Because
Yeah.
I think right away, a salesperson could practice the pause, and then
Absolutely.
they could build on that by maybe taking a training course, which I believe are offered by you, Laura. So they could invest in a training course, and then they could elevate to another level by working one-on-one with a coach. And I believe that you also offer coaching services to salespeople too. So it is possible for them to kind of map out the process of how can I start to improve.
Yeah. And in terms of mapping out the process, what I find is a lot of people, because they really don't understand what listening is, they have no idea how to map out the process themselves. So that's something that I can definitely help with as well.
Right. And for our viewers, there will be a link in the comments below the video to directly linking to Laura's website, so you can learn more about her courses and her coaching. How can a salesperson dedicated to listening? So we have salespeople who are watching this interview because they know listening is crucial to improvement in their sales, amongst other things. But is there a way that we can also help the prospect to listen well to them?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes. And it's a skill that I oftentimes call reverse paraphrasing, but in healthcare, it's often called teach back. So different professions call the skill different things, but basically in a nutshell, what you would say is something like, Michael, it's really important to me that I explain this concept well to you. Can you tell me in your own words what you heard? And so you're getting them to paraphrase you. And that then helps you understand how they've processed what you've just said and if they've processed what you've just said.
Interesting. Okay, because I heard earlier that we can reflect back to them what we're hearing to show them that we're very involved in the listening process and want to have that shared meaning together. But we can also ask them to reflect back what they're hearing from us to help them to connect better with us and reinforce with us that they are listening, that they are paying attention to what we're saying, that this isn't just a one-way dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And I
like
will. Yeah. And once you do that, Michael, they will pay much more attention because they know that you might check them back with that.
right, very good. And I've often heard people in listening classes or sometimes just in regular sales training classes say, I've been told I'm a bad listener or I'm not a good listener. Is there some credence to the idea that you shouldn't tell yourself you're a bad listener because then your brain will just want to reinforce that and make that true? I mean, is that true? You shouldn't say that you're a bad listener, or when people tell you you're just not a good listener, like what impact does that have on a person?
I think that self-talk is really important.
Mhm.
And if we are going to carry the story that we're a bad listener and not try to do anything to change it, then I think we'll probably stay a bad listener. I think that people really understand themselves a lot and they recognize what they do well and what they don't do well. Oftentimes when people say they're a bad listener, what I hear people say is, I can't remember names. If you remember everything else, but you don't remember names, that doesn't make you a bad listener. It just makes you bad at remembering names, right?
Yes.
So you really have to get into the nitty gritty of what listening is to understand the elements that you could improve in it. I think one of the preliminary elements, as you well know, is attention and focus, right?
Mhm.
So we can't listen to something if we're not paying attention and focusing on it, which means that we can't be multitasking in it. So if you're somebody who has your cell phone out while you're trying to sell, it's just not going to work. Yes, you are really bad at paying attention and focusing. So let's fix that first and then move on to another part of the process of listening.
I think what I'm hearing there, Laura, is that we can all be good listeners, but if we don't have an environment and a mental presence conducive to good listening, then we can all be poor listeners because we haven't set ourselves up well to listen.
Mhm.
And then, of course, there are some techniques to follow as well. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our viewers about listening and its role in the sales process? Because this has been very helpful so far, but maybe there's something I haven't asked that
Mhm.
you'd like to just tell us about.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, and again, it goes back to this idea of the relationship, because sales is about building relationships. And as you well know, people probably aren't going to buy from you the first, what is it? I hear anywhere from 9 times to 15 times, like touches that you have to have.
That's
So you
right.
have to be doing a lot of communicating with people, not only through ads, but face to face. And in that face to face, whether it's Zoom like we're doing, or literally face to face, what you're doing is you're building the relationship there. And in building the relationship, recognize that you're building likability and you're building trust if you're being a good listener. And because we would rather do business with people that we like and trust, people will think of you to buy something when they are making that decision to buy. So I think from sales, look at listening as a long-term game, because the quality of your listening is going to determine the quality of the relationship. And if you want this relationship for life, then you've got to be a good listener.
Great. Well, thank you for offering that additional information for our viewers to really dig into this idea of improving their listening skills. There have been so many good ideas here, Laura, and as I mentioned earlier, I will post a link to Dr. Laura's courses so that you can learn more about how to improve your listening and even consider really upping your game by taking that next step of being coached specifically around your listening skills. So thank you very much for being here with us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, Michael.